Number 1. Going to 7-Elevens today still gives me chills because of this incident. A bit of backstory. I am female, was 15 at the time, fairly petite, and dangerously polite. My brother was 12. My cousin was 4 years old, but was and is still much taller and more built than his age, as he takes after his giant of a father. It's the summer of 2013, so sorry if some details are a little fuzzy. My parents are struggling with their finances. We can't go on fancy vacations, so they ship us off to our aunt and uncle's place a couple of towns over. They're happy to have us as our cousin is an only child and liked having someone to play with. It's our 4th or 5th day there. A Saturday. So my uncle works in the nearby city and is finally back from an extended stay. He wants to take us to a zoo, but it's about 45 minutes from their house, as it's really big and has a great elephant exhibit, which is one of my cousin's favourite animals. My aunt decides not to go as she's recovering from a bad ankle sprain, so my uncle decides to take the 3 of us by himself. Was this the smartest idea? Probably not. But I was more than capable of helping look after my brother and cousin and had done it multiple times by myself before. My uncle is also huge as mentioned. He stands about 6'5" and weighs a solid 240 pounds. He looks really intimidating too, with a clean-shaved head and big muscles. However, the phrase gentle giant has never applied more to someone else. We drive for about 20 minutes before we stop at a gas station to use the restroom and get drinks and snacks, stretch, etc. It's your standard 7-Eleven, but more long from the entrance to the back of the store than it is wide, if that makes sense. The drinks are at the back of the store, so after using the bathroom we go there. My uncle wants to buy chips as he has a serious savoury tooth, and heads to the next aisle to check the selection out. My brother's being impossible about his drink choice, so we're standing there trying to decide what to get when this guy enters the same aisle as us. Keep in mind, it's been all of 2 minutes since our uncle left us. He's sort of old, maybe late 50s, and looks a lot like Santa Claus. I know it sounds crazy saying it now, but for a second I was genuinely stunned into thinking this guy was the jolly fat man from Christmas movies. White hair, a bit of a white beard, small spectacles covering twinkling eyes, and a button nose, lightly tinted pink. I think his appearance lulled me into a less suspicious state. The only thing that didn't resemble Santa was his outfit. Something more summer appropriate, but I can't put my finger on it today. And the type of twinkle in his eye. Sure, Santa may have liked kids, but he didn't like them that much. He starts off by lingering 5 feet away from us, pretending to check out the drinks whilst glancing over from time to time. My guard is up. I just grip both my brother and cousin's hands and remind myself my uncle is in the next aisle over. He slowly inches over to us with a weird shuffling motion, and when he's about a foot away from us, he smiles really widely.
"Your brother is really adorable,"
he says quietly, almost in a whisper. My grip automatically tightens on my brother's hand, and then I realize it's my baby's cousin the guy is talking about. He's staring right at him. At this point, the dangerously polite part of my brain kicks in and I say thank you. Stupid, I know. But although I'm not naive, some of my manners drilled into my head always come back to me at the worst times. Besides, my cousin was pretty cute, as he was a bit chubby and had big brown eyes, rosy cheeks, and a dimpled smile. My brother is yet to acknowledge this guy, as he didn't hear him and is concentrated on picking his drink. The guy inches a bit closer, as I inch a little away. I try to push my brother and pull my cousin as subtly as possible.
"I have a granddaughter close to his age. Why don't you get in the car, and I'll take you to see her, so your brother and she can play."
I look young for my age, but I must have looked especially young that day, if that guy thought I was going to get anywhere near him or his car. "No thanks, sir," I try to say as firmly and menacingly as possible, raising my voice a little. The guy notices and looks a little panicked as he scans the area quickly and shoves his hand into his pocket. He He pulls out a second later and opens his fist to reveal gummy vitamins. The ones covered in sugar that your parents used to trick you to take them. Edit. Now remembering them each to be individually wrapped with what I think was saran wrap, with about 5 gummies in total.
Here, take these. You kids need your vitamins.
He insists, trying to shove them at me. At this point, I'm done being polite and yell, "Uncle Tim!" He's there in a flash, and nearly gave the guy a heart attack, as he must have not realized that the huge guy in the next aisle was with us. We're Asian. He's Caucasian. Since my aunt is Asian, my cousin looks more like us than him. The guy takes one look at my uncle and dashes for the front door. My uncle chases him, but he's much slower, as this guy is surprisingly fast for a mid-50s man. And by the time my uncle gets to the entrance, the guy has jumped into his car with his engine still running and peels out. My uncle informs the store clerk, who in turn calls the police, who show up 20 minutes later, and can't really do anything about the situation, as we didn't get a license plate. We do give a description, and they sent a patrol car out to look for him, but by then he was long gone. We ended up going straight home, as the incident shook my uncle up really badly. I think to this day he still blames himself for not sticking directly by our side. It's only a couple of days later that shit actually hits the fan. The guy dropped the gummy vitamins on the floor in his haste to leave, and the police had taken them in to get tested. The results came back, and the stuff that I thought at the time was sugar wasn't actually sugar. It was meth powder. So to the sick fuck who tried to give little kids gummy bears coated with meth, I honestly hope you rot in hell. Note: my parents were informed of the incident and nearly had heart attacks, especially when they found out the contents of the gummies. We did go to a police lineup about a week later to try and identify the guy, but none of the suspects were him. All we could tell the police was that he was Santa Claus.
Number 2.
So a little background info before I get into things. I'm currently a 20-year-old gay male living in Iowa. I'm a bigger set guy, but I've always struggled with depression and social phobia. This meant I didn't make friends very easily, and when I did make a friend, I was admittedly pretty clingy about them. By the time I got to college, this had mostly cleared up, but I still had some issue with it. Hopefully this will help explain some of my actions in this story. My first year of college, I decided to go to the opposite end of the state from where I grew up. I wanted to feel independent, and I thought the distance would help force me to break out of my shell some. I was very wrong. I immediately became even more depressed than I already was, and it only took about 2 weeks of living there to start having suicidal thoughts. It didn't help any that the guy that I had been talking to and becoming friends with throughout the summer, and was supposed to be living in the dorms, ended up not going to college and leaving me alone in my dorm room. That is when I met Josh. Josh was another freshman on my floor, and after brief conversation I discovered he was bisexual. I immediately became attached to him, as I had no other friends at the time, and I felt like we had a lot in common. Before you ask, no, we never had sex. He wasn't really my type, and I didn't want to ruin the friendship with sex. Anyway, we became friends rather quickly, and about a month into college, Josh asked me if I wanted to move into a different dorm room and building with him, as neither of us could afford a single room, and he said he knew people in the other building that we could hang out with and not feel so secluded. Being a little naive, I agreed, and within a week we had packed up and moved our stuff into a different building. I didn't start having issues with Josh right away, but after a week or two I started noticing some things that made me uncomfortable. I noticed numerous times that my movies and DVDs had been moved around, and sometimes even left out in the room, without their cases. I am really protective of my DVD collection, and I wasn't alright with him using them without asking. I tried to bring this up with him, and he said he would stop, but he never did. I also noticed that I was being sexiled, as it was called, many times. Usually about once a week, I would be forced to leave my room for hours on end. Normally I wouldn't have cared, as I had no problem with sitting in the dorm room lounge until he got done. But he always chose to do it fairly late at night, sometimes even after I went to bed. I'm not a night person. Most of my classes were early in the morning, so I got really upset about this, and I did bring it up with him. Again, he said he would stop, but he never did. There were a couple of things that I didn't really think much of at the time, that now I'm not sure how innocent they were. For instance, I had to buy underwear about 3 times in the few months I was living there. I didn't think much of it, as I knew college laundry rooms were notorious for having things stolen, but looking back I am not sure if they even got that far. I also remember him having a real obsession with horror movies. At first that was great, because I'm a huge horror fan myself, but he preferred gore films while I preferred the film to have a good story and atmosphere. He used to watch gory horror films like Saw and more all the time, and I vaguely remember waking up one night to see him touching himself whilst watching the remake of I Spit on Your Grave. At first, I wrote it off as him just scratching his leg, but now I'm not so sure. Another issue that I had was that while he would kick me out of the room about once a week so he could have sex, I was never allowed. Every time I asked, he just complained about having a lot of homework he needed to work on, and that he hated doing it anywhere but his room. I tried to ignore it, but he also wouldn't even let me have alone time to pleasure myself. Whenever I would get started, he would always seem to walk into the room, and told me to keep going and he would just ignore me and listen to music. But I don't think he ever did. Like I said, these were little things, but they start to get to me. So before Thanksgiving break, I decided to look for a new roommate. I ended up finding one, and had signed all the papers needed for me to switch rooms. But I had to wait until the end of semester. This wasn't an issue with me, and I told Josh about this, and he seemed to take things just fine. Thanksgiving break came and went. It was only about 4 days, but it was a much needed escape from college, and it was nice to see my family again. When I got back though, I found that my roommate hadn't left campus for break like he said he was going to. I also found that he had taken all of my stuff, even things in the closet and drawers, and had thrown them into a giant pile in the middle of the dorm room. He had even gone so far as to buy new clothes to put in my old closet, so that I didn't have any room for my own. I complained to him and reminded him that I wasn't moving out for another 3 weeks, but he simply said that he didn't care, and that if I was going to leave he might as well help me a little bit. This wasn't the last straw, however, and I stayed there for another week. That is, until he pushed me past my limits. My last night in the room, I had asked him if I could have the room to myself for a few hours, as I wanted to Skype with my long-distance boyfriend and would prefer it if it was in private. He didn't seem upset about it, and grabbed some of his homework and his laptop and left the room. 2 hours later, at about 10 p.m, I finished my Skype conversation and texted him saying he could come back to the room any time he wanted. I stayed up for 2 more hours browsing the internet, but he never came back to the room. I didn't think anything of it, and simply went to bed. About 2 or 3 in the morning, I was suddenly woken up by the sound of death metal music blaring so loud in my room that my RA halfway down the hall was woken up by it, followed shortly by a really loud bang as someone slammed my door shut. I got up and shut off the music, finding a CD of Josh's in his CD player. At first I didn't think much of it until I saw he had left a note as well. "Next time, don't treat your roommates like shit, or else you won't wake up at all." That was the last I could take. I had done nothing to him that would be considered treating him like shit, and I was terrified about the threat he had given me. I called campus security and they came out and took my statement, but since Josh wasn't there and hadn't done anything illegal, they couldn't do anything. The officer just advised that I stay in a friend's room for the night, and that I move out of the room as soon as possible. I told my RA and the head of the dorm building the situation. They gave me permission to start moving the next day. I didn't have any other issues with Josh after I left, but my story doesn't end here. About halfway through the semester, I walked into the main lobby of the building and saw Josh with all of his stuff next to him. He was talking to a couple of police officers. Not campus security guards, actual police officers. One of which never took his hand off his gun the entire time he was around Josh. At first I just laughed and figured he'd gotten in some sort of trouble that I thought he deserved. That is until I got brought into the dorm office the next day to talk to a couple of officers. They asked me a couple of questions about Josh, like why did I stop living with him as my roommate, if I knew anything about him having used any kind of illegal substances, and if I ever knew him to be a violent individual. I told them everything that I've told all of you, and that when we were living together, he did smoke marijuana now and then, but I didn't really care, as I have no issues with people who smoke pot. I don't do it myself, mind you, but I also don't believe it should be an illegal substance. Anyways, I asked them why I was being questioned, and what they said made my heart drop into my stomach. Apparently Josh was into using a lot more than just weed. He apparently started using cocaine and meth, and even some heroin at some point in his short college life. About a week ago, Josh apparently used heroin and ended up severely attacking another student in one of his classes. He smashed his face in with a heavy textbook, and apparently he also stabbed him with a pencil before running out of class. When he got back to the dorm, he completely trashed the place. He ended up breaking his TV, his gaming systems, DVDs, CDs, and even the college chairs, desks, and windows, all of which belonged to the dorm building, and not him. He also took some more drugs and ended up overdosing, meaning he had to go to the hospital for an entire week until he was better. When he got out, he was banned from the campus, and the police were there to make sure he had gotten off of the premises before midnight, or else they were going to arrest him. Luckily, he didn't have a roommate when all of this happened, so no one else but the student from his class ended up getting hurt. Still, part of me wonders what would have happened if I had still been his roommate and had been home during the incident. Would he have attacked me as well? Am I lucky to even be alive right now? I never saw or heard from Josh again, and I'm beyond glad about this. I have since moved back to my hometown and am going to school there, and I have yet to have any other major problems like this when it comes to college. But I still wonder what could have happened if I hadn't gotten out of there when I had. So Josh, the roommate who made my first semester of college a living hell, let's never meet again.
Number 3.
In light of the recent thread about a lot of stories here being obviously untrue, I figured I'd post this since it totally fucking happened to me, and I figured you guys would like it. Back in 2010, I had moved to my first apartment alone, and before that, I had always lived with at least 2 or more people, so I was pretty excited to finally have my own apartment all to myself. I didn't live in a particularly bad complex, and it was a decent-sized 1-bedroom. In this complex, we tended to get a lot of people going door to door selling stuff. Knives, things from catalogs, magazines, stuff like that. I always brushed them off, because it usually seemed shady, and I really hate door-to-door salesmen. Well, one morning, around 9, I was getting ready to go to work, and I heard a knock at my door. It was some guy selling magazines. He launched right into it and told me that he gets dropped off by his leader and walks around the city to different complexes and homes selling these magazines. If he sold a certain amount, he got to take some trip or something. He was probably like 5'9", normal build, had kind of greasy looking blonde hair. Like bright ass blonde hair some people have. He was very charismatic, and he seemed like a nice guy, but I told him I wasn't interested. He pushed and showed me the kinds they offered, and there were a couple I actually did like to read, and I could get them at a discount if I signed up. Which means he suckered me right into this shit. What can I say? The guy was nice, and he was around my age, and he seemed pretty genuine. Why not help him out and get discount magazines? So I let him in. We proceeded to fill out some paperwork and all that jazz. He made small talk with me and asked my age and how long I've had ferrets and stuff like that. We ended up talking for about half an hour, and I told him I had to leave for work. So he got his stuff, said thanks, and left. At this point, I was a server in a chain restaurant, and I was working a double that day. I had a couple hours later I got off and came home. Just when I'd gotten changed and sat down, there was a knock on my door. It was the magazine dude from earlier. I thought maybe I'd forgotten something. Maybe the paperwork hadn't gotten finished, so I opened the door. He said hi, and I asked him if he'd forgotten something. He said, "No, I just enjoyed talking to you, and I've gotten my quota for the day, so I'd figured I'd see if you're home and if you wanted to hang out while I wait for my leader to come get me, if that's okay." It was a little weird, but I figured it couldn't hurt. I mean, I've got neighbours above and beside me, and across from my door, so why not? I felt pretty safe. I did tell him I was working a split day, so he couldn't stay long. He ended up hanging out the whole 2 hours I had off, and he left when I left for work. While he was there, we talked about life in general, and I asked about his job. He travelled for it and said he and his group were only here in town for a week. Then they go somewhere else to sell magazines. I thought it sounded pretty cool. He started to confide in me that he was a little tired of it and wanted to have a normal job and other stuff I can't really remember. I told him if he feels that way, he should just quit and go home. We got off on another subject after that, but I figured that was the last I would see of him. That night at work, I got a text from an out-of-state number I didn't know. All it said was "Hey." So I replied back, "Who is this?" It was that fucking magazine guy. At first, I wondered how in the fuck he got my number. But then I remembered that paperwork he had asked for. I kept cool about it, but at this point I'm officially weirded out that this stranger is getting in contact with me so much after not even really talking a lot. Or, for that fact, not even really knowing me. I asked what was up and he asked what I was doing. I told him working because that's why I had to leave earlier. I guess he thought I was lying because he asked why I was at work so late. It was around 11:30 p.m, 12 a.m. I told him it was because they had closed tonight. He said, "Oh, well, I'm just chilling in my hotel room." I put my phone away and got back to work. I didn't care what he was doing, and I didn't care to talk to him anymore. I finished work, got off, and went home. As I walked up to my door at the apartment, my neighbour was sitting outside with her husband on the porch. We weren't close, but we were friendly. I said hi and they asked me if I knew some blonde guy. I said no, why? She told me some guy with blonde hair came by knocking on my door while they were outside earlier and asked if they knew when I'd be home. It was that fucking magazine guy again. I told her how he'd come back earlier, and if they see him again, don't ever let him know when I'm home. Her husband says we'll keep a watch and make sure that the guy goes away if they see him again. I thank them and head inside. I'm pretty weirded out at this point, but I just try to let it go. There's no way he'll try and come back again, and I can avoid him for what few days he had left here, if he does try to come back. I assume he wouldn't though, because, you know, what kind of weirdo does that shit? So the next day, I didn't have work until about 5 p.m. So I sat around and hung out all day, and did some cleaning. It was a Friday night and we usually get pretty busy at work. I had a mild drinking problem at this time. I was 20, so I say mild because I was just like a kid who liked to drink a lot. So before I would go into work on weekends, I would have a couple of drinks beforehand. Not to get drunk, but I would be a lot more social and outgoing or fun with customers. It's around 3 p.m, if I remember right, and I'm in the middle of my drink and feeling pretty good when someone knocks on my door. I forget my worries of yesterday and just waltz over and open that bitch up, not looking through my peephole, and guess who? Motherfucking Blondie. Of course, in my slightly tipsy state, I'm all like, "Hey, what's up?" He tells me he got dropped off at the complex across the road and wasn't having much luck, so he'd figured he'd stop by and hang out with me again. Fuck it. Come on in, why the hell not? We have a couple of drinks together and talk for a couple of hours again, and he starts talking about quitting his job and getting a normal life and all that. It's then I start to wonder why he keeps calling it a normal life, and why he calls his group leader a sponsor sometimes. He starts telling me how cool I am and how he wishes he could meet more girls like me. He says he likes the city I live in a lot and the people seem nice. Just a bunch of stuff like that. I start feeling kind of weird around him because he keeps sitting closer to me and seemed to be getting more flirty. At this point, I decided I was done with the dude and I wasn't answering the door for him anymore. I told him I had to go to work and to have a good night. In reality, I didn't have work for another good half an hour or more, but I just wanted him away from me and out of my apartment. Work was great, made mad tips. Come home with no incident, neighbours didn't say anything to me. The next day, I'm out running some errands and I get a text from Blondie again. He sent me like 5 or 6 in a row, asking where I'm at and to open the door because he's outside, and how he just left his job like I told him to, and he needs a place to think about things, and how he knows I'm inside because he can hear me. First of all, I'm like, what the fuck? But second of all, I never told him to quit his job. I suggested that shit, and never offered to be his fallback plan. I tell him I'm not home and to leave. He says he can hear me outside, and he knows I'm lying. He was hearing my ferrets in their pen, most likely. No one was ever in my apartment. He's pretty much freaking out on me over text and saying he wants to move in with me and start a new life here in my city. He doesn't have the money to fly home, and he barely has money for food. He starts calling me over and over again, and leaves voicemails and keeps texting. He finally says he'll just wait on me to get home, and we can talk about it. No. I kept telling him he completely misunderstood me, and he needs to go back to his job. I don't want him around, and I don't even know him. I was just trying to be friendly when he wanted to chat. I didn't want him to full-blown move in with me. As I'm getting all these messages and stuff, I'm driving to a sporting goods store. I don't have the money for a gun, and really at that point I didn't even know how to go about buying one, and definitely didn't know how to use one. But I did know how to swing a bat. I played softball for 6 years, and I can swing a damn bat, so I bought a damn bat. I was shaking when I put it in the back seat of my car, still getting texts from him. I stopped reading them at this point because I was getting too upset and didn't know how to reply or to deal with someone like this. I didn't even want to go home yet because I was afraid he was there, but I didn't have anyone to call to help me. I drove up to the park and sat for about an hour, and finally decided to go home. He wasn't there, but my neighbour's husband was outside when I got there. He said the guy had basically been beating on my door for almost an hour and they threatened to call the cops, which I guess is what finally made him leave. I thanked him and went inside. After that, I never heard from him again. I don't know what the fuck was wrong with that guy, but he has some problems. I kept the baseball bat next to my front door from then on, and is next to my front door even now.
Number 4.
So this story takes place over one summer when I was 14 years old. It was 11 p.m, and I was in my bedroom on my computer. I had just gotten home. I was living with my brother at the time because my parents were in Florida for a while, so me and my brother were the only ones home, and the only ones who had access to the house. I needed a photo of myself for something, I don't remember what, and opened my camera roll to look through. Here's the picture. Immediately, my whole body froze and I couldn't move. I immediately closed the camera roll and sat on my bed for a while. I began shaking and tears of fright came to my eyes. I gained the courage to open the camera roll to look again, and stared at the photo for at least 10 minutes, feeling more uneasy every second. I checked the time the picture was taken, and that made me more distressed. The picture was taken at 9:45 p.m. What made it worse was that me and my brother had both left the house at 8 to get dinner. No one was home at the time the picture was taken. I'm afraid to leave my room and picked up my phone to message my brother. I told him I was scared, I couldn't move, and if he could come here. He asked me what was wrong and I sent him the picture from my computer along with what happened. Him thinking I was joking, laughed and told me good night. Me not joking, I called him. He obviously could hear me crying and started questioning me. I told him to come to my room, and so he did. He entered my room with a golf club for protecting. At this point, we were both shitting our pants, staring at the blurry picture of a man we didn't recognize. We decided to check out the house to see if anyone was home, so we proceeded to swipe through all 4 floors of our house. We didn't see anything sketchy on the top 3 floors, so we walked down to the basement. We walked down the stairs, and my brother led the way. "Shit," he whispered. I looked to the back corner of our basement where the cellar door leads to the outside. The door and the hatch thing that covers the steps outside are both wide open. After this happened, we called the police and showed them the picture, and told them the story. They told us to lock our doors and call if we heard or saw anything. We locked the doors and both sat in his room for the rest of the night. Whoever was in our house and on my computer must have opened the computer and opened the camera accidentally. He must have accidentally pressed the space bar whilst the camera was open in the background and snapped a picture of him. I still wonder why someone would just break into someone's house for nothing. Nothing was stolen, no drawers or cabinets were open. Nothing seemed out of place. My brother ended up moving out of the house a few days later in fear the guy would come back. Hey guys, Flamingo Creepy here. Thank you for checking out my video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I post a new video every Monday and Wednesday, but if you're impatient, I do have older videos you can check out if you haven't already seen them. I would like to thank the Reddit users who gave me permission to share their stories with you. The links to the original stories will be in the description. If you want to send me your own creepy stories to reach this beautiful creepy community, you can either email them to me or message me over Facebook. Details for both are in the description. Just be sure to include a brief statement saying I do have your permission. Also, let me know if it's a fictional story for Wednesday's video or a true encounter for Monday's video. If you haven't already, go like my Facebook page as I post daily about various creepy things ranging from urban legends to serial killers. As always, my creepers, be safe. And remember, the monster isn't under your bed. It's in the street.